The Vietnam War was one of the bloodiest conflicts in human history, and yet even amidst its horror, there were stories of humanity, sacrifice, and true heroism. One such story belongs to Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson Jr., a helicopter pilot who risked his life and career to stop an infamous massacre. On March 1968, Thompson was flying a medevac mission near the village of My Lai when he saw U.S. troops shooting unarmed Vietnamese civilians. Without hesitation, he landed his helicopter in the middle of the carnage and single-handedly saved hundreds of lives. But why? Why did he risk his life to stop the massacre? What was his motivation? Was he simply a kind man who couldn't bear to see innocent people being murdered? Or was there more to the story? Let's find out in today's episode of The Greatest Heroes. Born on October 19, 1943 in Nashville, Tennessee, Hugh Thompson Jr. grew up in relative poverty. His father worked as a construction worker, and the family struggled to make ends meet. Despite the financial hardship, Thompson was an excellent student and athlete in high school. He excelled in football, basketball, and baseball and was known for his bravery and determination. After graduating from high school in 1961, Thompson enlisted in the Army and was sent to Vietnam as a helicopter pilot. Thompson's job was to fly medevac missions, which meant that he had to land his helicopter in dangerous areas and rescue wounded soldiers. He quickly became known for his skill and courage as he often flew into hostile territory without a second thought for his own safety. In fact, Thompson was awarded several medals for his bravery, including the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Air Medal. These awards were given to him for his exceptional heroism and his commitment to saving lives. However, despite the recognition he received, Thompson was becoming increasingly disillusioned with the war. He began to question the purpose of the conflict and the methods being used to fight it. In particular, he was troubled by the reports of civilian casualties and the lack of accountability for those responsible. Thompson's doubts were only reinforced when he witnessed the brutality of the war firsthand. He saw the horrors of combat and the devastating impact it had on both the soldiers and the civilians. Despite his growing unease, Thompson continued to do his duty and save lives. However, he knew that something had to change if the war was ever going to end. So he began to take small actions to try to make a difference. For example, he started to speak out against the mistreatment of civilians and the abuse of power. He also began to search for ways to end the conflict peacefully. But these efforts were not always well received, and Thompson often faced opposition from his superiors. They saw his actions as insubordination and his questioning of authority as a threat. As a result, Thompson was often reprimanded and punished for his behavior. Despite the backlash he faced, Thompson refused to back down. He knew that he had to do something to stop the violence and bring about peace. Then came March 12, 1968, the day that would change Thompson's life forever. On that day, Thompson was flying a medevac mission near the village of My Lai when he witnessed something that shocked him to the core. He saw U.S. troops shooting unarmed Vietnamese civilians. Thompson was horrified and knew that he had to do something to stop it. He immediately landed his helicopter in the middle of the carnage and began to shout at the soldiers to stop. But they didn't listen. They continued to fire on the villagers, and Thompson was forced to take action. He pulled out his pistol and fired warning shots into the air. This startled the soldiers and gave them a much-needed wake-up call. Some of them dropped their rifles and surrendered, while others fled into the jungle. With the shooting now stopped, Thompson turned his attention to the villagers. He helped the wounded and comforted the dying, and soon realized that he had just saved hundreds of lives. But he knew that he couldn't stay in My Lai. The U.S. military was likely to retaliate, and he didn't want to get caught in the crossfire, so he loaded the survivors onto his helicopter and flew them to safety. In the aftermath of the massacre, Thompson was hailed as a hero. The villagers he had saved praised him as a savior, and the U.S. military recognized his bravery. He was awarded the Soldier's Medal for his actions, which was the highest honor that could be bestowed upon a soldier for heroism not involving combat. It seemed like Thompson had done the right thing, and justice would be served. But Thompson soon discovered that this was not the case. The U.S. military was determined to cover up the massacre and protect the soldiers involved. They launched an investigation, but it was a sham. The investigators took no real action, and the soldiers involved in the massacre were not held accountable. As a result, Thompson felt betrayed and disillusioned. He had put his life on the line to save innocent people, only to have his government reward him with a cover-up and a slap on the wrist. He began to realize that the war was not just a tragic mistake, but a corrupt and immoral enterprise. Determined to expose the truth, Thompson went public with his story. He spoke out about the massacre and the subsequent cover-up, naming names and providing details. He knew that he was risking his career and his reputation, but he felt that it was his duty to speak out, and he wasn't alone. Other soldiers who had witnessed the massacre or had information about it began to come forward. Together, they provided a detailed account of what had happened in My Lai, along with evidence that the U.S. military was trying to cover it up. For a while, it seemed like Thompson and the other soldiers were making progress. The media picked up the story, and the public began to demand answers. The U.S. government was forced to launch another investigation, and this time, they couldn't ignore the evidence. However, the fallout from Thompson's actions was swift and severe. He was ostracized by his peers and superiors, and was eventually kicked out of the military. He was branded a troublemaker and a traitor, and his career as a helicopter pilot came to an abrupt end. But Thompson didn't care. He had done what he felt was right, and that was all that mattered. In the years since the massacre, Thompson has become a symbol of courage and integrity. He is remembered as the man who stood up for what he believed in, even when it cost him everything. And that's all for today's episode. Please let us know your thoughts on Hugh Thompson Jr.'s story in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe, so you never miss an episode of The Greatest Heroes. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.